Everybody, good evening, and tonight we're going to be talking about the super expensive system I featured in a video a few days ago. However, what I want to do before that is let's go through the individual pieces of the system. We'll talk about cost and kind of when they came out and sort of the history of the piece, and then we'll kind of go through sound quality, and then I'll talk about, and then we'll do kind of a demo video. But anyway, for that, I wanted to talk a minute about these Blue Note live records and the compilations that happen with Blue Note. Now, this is Blue Note live at the Roxy. This came out in the early 70s. I want to say 73, 74, somewhere in there. And it's an absolute phenomenally well-recorded, very awesome live album. And what's weird about these, and also the Blue Note compilations too, that they've done over the years, particularly in the 70s, sort of the late 60s and through the early 70s, they brought out a lot of compilations of some of their older material. And, people sleep on those things. I don't know why. Honestly, it's all the original material. They're just repurposing it into basically a compilation. And, and people sleep on them. You can't go buy, the original, Miles Davis Blue Note releases for anything less than $1,000. But you can pick up those compilations, which have a couple of the same tracks for, $5, $10. Here's something I picked. Oh, there it is. $5. Picked it up. $5. Absolutely mint condition. Well, the records are. The sleeve's a little messed up in a couple of places. But yeah, don't sleep on these Blue Note live records or their compilations. So these are the Evett and Shaw Pesaros. They came out kind of in the middle 2000s. I'm pretty sure they retailed for about $6,000, $5,500, $6,000, somewhere in there. All metal construction. It is basically a bookshelf that sits on a matching dedicated stand. Very, very lovely. Very, very nice. They have Morel drivers. The unit itself, I believe, is a three-way. Very, very nice speakers. Like I said, all aluminum design, heavy as heck. And of course, these are the Bryston 7B SST squared. Monoblocks, it's about 608 ohms in terms of wattage, and I want to say 950 into 4. Of course, the Evett and Shaws are 4 ohms, so it's getting close to 1,000 watts. I've got some PS Audio power cables. Very, very nice. Original retail price was around $9,000, $10,000 for the pair. Very, very lovely. Herb Reichert reviewed them in Stereophile, as a matter of fact, and liked them. Yeah, very nice, very heavy, very, very awesome. Of course, we've got the Audio Research LS12 high-definition preamp. Full function, balanced ins, outs, single-ended ins, outs. Very lovely, almost laboratory-grade construction, which, of course, is what Audio Research does. Came out in the early 2000s. Price-wise, I want to say it was around $3,500, $4,000, somewhere in there. So quite costly, but very, very nice, high quality. So what do I think about sound quality with this super expensive system? If you add everything up, we're probably including all the ancillary components, all the cabling at the original prices. We're probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $22,000, maybe $23,000. Okay. Now, of course, I didn't pay that, but the important thing is it's quite an expensive system. I won't say it's the most expensive system I ever heard, but it's in the top 5. Truthfully said, this is a great system. We go back to my prior video about, do you need expensive hi-fi? And I said in there that I think you really don't, and at least not in the realm of better sound. Now, of course, you do get great sound with this. If I go in the living room and listen to my inexpensive system, that's maybe $1,000 altogether. This has some attributes that are better, that is better, right? But on the other hand, I get just as much musical satisfaction for $1,000 as this system provides for $23,000. You see what I mean? Yeah, what do you get for sound quality on expensive systems like this? Well, there's a few things you get. Sound staging is very nice. Sitting between the speakers, great sound stage, great left to right balance. I've got these about 6 foot apart, maybe almost 7. Beautiful sound. absolutely phenomenal. Great tone and timbre. I really like the audio research with the Brystons as opposed to the Macintosh I featured in the previous video. I think the audio research works better in this application. The Brystons really don't, they're very neutral, but not sterile. They kind of are the scenario where they don't have a sound of their own. And whatever preamp you use or speakers you hook it up to, that's kind of the final arbiter of what you're hearing, or the quality of what you're hearing. And in this case, the audio research is an absolutely phenomenal preamp, really top level in my opinion. I love audio research products, and they are absolutely phenomenal, and this is no exception. But yeah, great sound staging, great left to right balance. Things do not drift. You feel like if you close your eyes, you can see solid objects in front of you. Very, very nice. Great tone and timbre. Great spatial depth as well, which is something I don't often talk about, but with this system, it becomes obvious, it becomes noticeable. Very, very truly. Great color saturation as well. Not the best I've heard. The limitation here with this system is in spite of the Bryston's power, they kind of come across slightly sort of a little less meaty than I've heard. And I know that sounds like a contradiction because you're thinking, well, I'm pushing almost 1,000 watts into these speakers. Well, you must get all the body and texture and solidity that you want, but there is a slight thinness to the sound, and I've noticed that with any of the preamps I've used. But in any case, absolutely phenomenal. I really don't know how to describe it. I will say, it is probably some of the best sound that I've heard altogether. I've heard some very expensive systems that I didn't really care for. Maybe it's one of those things, the room it was set up in, the environment, maybe my mindset at that time. But here now in this room with these components, it's truly, really, really, truly a brilliant sound. That brings me back to the idea of, do you need expensive hi-fi? And the answer to that is no. As I've talked about several times, you can get great musical satisfaction, satiation, wet your whistle, that type of thing. You can get your fill on musical fulfillment very easily and very cheaply. You don't need $23,000 worth of hi-fi gear. Although it is nice and build quality is phenomenal. And of course, you also have this perspective when you have this type of equipment that, man, I have the best, or, I have some of the best, you know what I mean? It's kind of like driving around in a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to do one of those Toro car rental things where you can, people will rent out sports cars. Well, I drove a Huracan, fully automatic. Of course, you can use it manual with the paddle shifters. I forget what year it was, but it was an absolutely phenomenal car. And it wasn't the best of the best, not at all. It wasn't the most expensive car that Lamborghini makes, or the most expensive exotic car that you can get. But it was cool in the back of your mind. You had this thought, man, I'm driving a Lamborghini. And it made you feel cool that you were driving it, that sort of thing. And having this is part of it, in my opinion. You have the perspective of, man, I've got cool audio research, and I've got these cool $6,000 speakers, man, and these cool massive Bryston amps, man, I'm the shit. I really don't have any conclusions on this video. I will say, as a kind of a final thought, if you have the opportunity to hear high-end hi-fi, I suggest you do it. People sometimes bemoan the lack of hi-fi shops in their area, or, man, back in 1974, there was a hi-fi, you couldn't spit in town without hitting a hi-fi store or a stereo shop. And yeah, that's probably true, right? But on the other hand, they say that with sort of this idea that hi-fi shops don't exist at all anymore. But that's definitely not true. I've got 4 different hi-fi shops within a day's drive from me. I could take and hop in my car and go drive somewhere, and I could be at a hi-fi shop that sells Macintosh, that sells Bryston, that sells audio research, that sells Class A, that sells Cord Electronics, that sells Wilson and D'Agostino if you're looking to spend $1 million. You know, I can go to these shops and I could say, hey man, let me listen to that $1 million hi-fi in there that you got. How does that Momentum Monoblocks, you know, how do they sound? Let me hear them. And anyway, you know, so if you have the opportunity to hear a very high-end system like this or other high-end systems, do it. You know, I think the big part of that too is people will often, especially internet trolls, oh, expensive hi-fi isn't any different. You know, my $30 Fosse amp I bought off of Amazon or AliExpress is just as good as those $10,000 Brystons he's got on that video. Man, that guy's a loser. He don't know what the fuck he's talking about. Well, okay, maybe I don't. But I do know that these definitely sound better than a $30 Fosse. I also know that, you know, you don't know until you know, you know?